Okay, so it's great to see everybody. It is Parashat Mattot, not Mas'eh like I started to turn to. And what I wanted to speak about tonight is a story in Parashat Mattot. If you're following in the blue chumash of the art scroll, you can find it on page 910. 910. There's actually two things I wanted to touch on tonight. We may not get to both of them, and if we don't get to the second one, then Be'ezrat Hashem next year we'll be here again with even more people, and we'll do that then. So this is the story of Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad. So it says, this is Pasuk, verse number 1 of chapter 32 of the Parasha, where it says the big lev, lamed bet, in the middle of the page. So So there was a lot of cattle or livestock that belonged to Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad. It was very, very significant. And they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilad, and behold, it was a place for livestock. Why are they looking at land right now? What's going on? What land is it talking about? The other side of the Jordan River that they're supposed to be leaving soon, right? Now, why are they in possession of this land? Does anybody remember?
They defeated Sichon and Og.
Right, so in the battle of Sichon and Og, they annexed this land, they took this land, and apparently they were just going to leave it. So leave it empty and to cross the Yarden and go to Eretz Israel. But Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad say, hey, we have a lot of livestock. This place is ideal for livestock. It's a beautiful pasture. So Vayavo Bnei Gad u'Bnei Reuven. We've noticed in the last couple of parashiot a lot of people petitioning for various things from Moshe. We had Benot Tzlofchad last week asking for inheritance. Now we have Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. Now obviously the entire tribes did not come together. That would have been an enormous chaos. But it means the representatives came. The representatives came and they said Vayomeru al Moshe. And I want you to take a close look at how this negotiation goes down here. So Vayomeru al Moshe v'el Elazar Kohen. So they spoke to Moshe and Elazar Kohen. Why didn't they speak to Aharon Kohen? He already died. Very good. Okay. Just making sure you're paying attention. Okay. And to the princes of the congregation, the heads of the congregation, saying, and this is what they said: Atarot v'divon v'yazer v'nimra v'cheshbon v'el aleh usvam unvo uvon. So they listed all of these cities. Okay, these are just the names of cities. And haaretz asher hika Hashem lifnei adat Yisrael. Eretz Miknehi. The land that Hashem struck before the congregation of Israel is a land of livestock, meaning it's a land that would support livestock. It's a pasture. V'la'avadecha mikneh. And it just so happens that your servants, by your servants they mean we have a lot of livestock. And then look at what's in the Torah. What do you have in the Torah there? After they say that? Yeah. There's a big gap there. A big paragraph break. Is the conversation over? No, they just started the conversation. Why is there a space there? So, what happened? Sorry. So, what happened here? What happened here? Did they actually ask Moshe for anything yet? They didn't ask for anything yet, right? They just made an observation. Have you ever done that before? You know, kind of trying to hint to somebody, but without saying it. You know? I noticed you're trying to get rid of that car, and I really don't have a car, I really need a car. And the person just doesn't say anything. What does that mean if they don't say anything? They don't want to give it to you, right?
They're stupid.
You're just pointing out, or they're not that smart. That could be, but that's not the case here, right? Here we're assuming very smart. So they said they were trying to be indirect and have Moshe offer it to them, right? So they said, hey, what a coincidence. This land that we just acquired is perfect for people with livestock. And we were just thinking, we have a lot of livestock. And Moshe Rabbeinu just doesn't say anything. Just hoping that they'll go away, maybe. That is the answer. The answer is no, right? He didn't say anything. That's why there's a pause there, because they're waiting for a response, and nothing comes. Like when you're trying to hint to somebody something, and they're trying to hint to you, go away. Or the answer is no, but they don't want to come out and say it to you. And you're hoping that they're going to take the initiative, and they don't. So what happens? Vayomeru. So they continue the conversation. Because Moshe doesn't say anything. They were hoping he would make the connection and make the offer. He doesn't say anything. If we found favor in your eyes, they said, if we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a possession, and we won't, and don't make us cross over the Jordan. Al ta'avirenu. Don't cross us over, meaning don't make us cross over. So at first they didn't come out directly and ask for what they wanted, right? They were being kind of passive, kind of hinting. This time they come straight out and say, listen, we could use this land. Instead of going over the Yarden, why don't we just take this land? Why should we leave it here? And does Moshe Rabbeinu like this suggestion? What a nice, they're taking initiative. It's really very nice. He says, Vayomer Moshe livnei Gad v'livnei Reuven, achechem yavou lamilchama v'atem teshuvu fo. Are your brothers going to go out to war and you sit here? Now, why did this pasuk become famous this past year? You know why, right? You know why, right? Because some Haredim who were protesting against the law that was going to make them go to the army wrote on a sign, "Ha'achechem yavou lamilchama." Are you going to let them make your brothers go into war? And you're going to sit here and not go to protest against it, which is exactly the opposite of what the pasuk means. The pasuk is saying the opposite. How can you let your brothers go out to war and you're going to sit here? They took it the opposite way. You're going to let your brothers go to war and sit here? No, you have to leave the kollel and go protest. That's the only time you leave the kollel. Right? So they took the pasuk, and then somebody pointed out to them, excuse me, that pasuk is the exact opposite meaning, so they took all the signs down. It was an embarrassment. Anyway, so the pasuk became famous this past year. But anyway, why are you going to cause the heart of the Jewish people to be dissuaded from passing over to the land that Hashem has given them? And then he goes on to describe the whole cheta meraglim. Right? Don't you remember what happened? Now, are these the same people that did Cheta Meraglim? Who is he talking to? He's talking to the children, right? These are not the people who did Cheta Meraglim. But this is what caused the parents to wander in the desert for 40 years, right? So, this is what your fathers did. And this is exactly what they did. They went over to the land, they came back with a bad report, and they made everybody nervous. And now what are people going to say when they hear that you're not going? It's going to ruin the morale, right? People are going to say, oh, a huge segment of Am Yisrael is not going. Oh, we don't want to go either. We're going to look, we also need, there's also some other nice things on this side of the Yarden that we found that we want to stay here. Everybody's going to come up with an excuse because they don't want to go to war. They don't want to face the war, and they're going to be afraid. And you're just going to lower the morale, and you're going to undermine everything that we've built up of the bitachon that they have now. That they're confident and they're prepared to enter Eretz Yisrael. You're going to destroy it because they're going to see this as a sign of weakness. They're not going to understand your financial calculations, your economic, proposal. They're going to look at it as, oh, they don't want to go. And if they don't want to go, why should we have to go? And so. Hashem ביום ההוא, וישבע לאמור, יהיו אנשים העולים ממצרים, מבין 20 שנה ומעלה את האדמה שנשבעתי לאברהם ליצחק וליעקב, כי לא מילאו אחריי, בלתי כלב בן יפונה כניזי ויהושע בן נון. So what happened last time? They hesitated to go into the land of Israel. What happened last time? Last time there was a question, last time there was a panic about this. What happened? What was the outcome? They had to wander for 40 years. So Hashem's going to... If you create some kind of a panic amongst the Jews now, and they start resisting, refusing to go in because they think it's too dangerous, they take it as a signal that it's too dangerous to go in, and the people are looking for excuses not to go in, then guess what's going to happen? We're going to be wandering another 40 years in the desert. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu, that would be horrible for everybody. So, and then it says, "V'hinei kamtem tachad avotechem tarbut anashim chataim." You're following the path of sinful people. This is 9:12. Dispot od al haron Hashem al Yisrael ki tishuvun me'acharav vayasef od lanicho b'midbar v'shechatem l'chol am hazeh. You're going to destroy this entire people with this suggestion. So, whereas did Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad, were they looking for a way to find an exemption from the army?
No.
What was the real motive here?
They saw land stuff.
It was genuine. It was sincere. Their motive was, but sometimes, appearances are much more significant than reality. We know that, right? Appearances are more significant than reality sometimes. People are going to have the impression that it's too dangerous, it's too risky, you don't want to go because you're looking for excuses, you're looking for this, and they're going to back out. So at first, the answer is no. But what's amazing is, so if Moshe Rabbeinu, if you came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and you had some proposal like this, some radical proposal, we're not going to go into the land of Israel, we're going to stay behind. And the answer was, absolutely not. If you do this, you're going to undermine the Jewish people, you are going to undermine everything that we've built up in these 40 years, you can't go. So what would most people do at this point? What would most people do at this point? What would you do? Give up, probably, right? Okay, the answer is no. What am I going to do? I'm going to argue? The answer is no. We see the bigger picture here, the bigger impact that we might have on Bnei Israel. So, we withdraw our proposal. But they don't do that. They make a counter proposal. Okay, the negotiations continue. Listen, we'll make a deal with you, Moshe Rabbeinu. You're Jewish. You know how to make deals. Here's the deal. We're going to build stables for our livestock. Okay, fenced in areas for the livestock, and cities for our children. And we're going to go prepared, armed, into Lifnei Bnei Yisrael. We're going to go in front of them. We're going to be on the front lines with everybody. Until the point that everyone is settled in Eretz Yisrael, and only then. But we'll leave our children back here so they don't have to go and put themselves in harm's way, because they're not going to fight, we're going to fight. So they don't have to come. We're going to leave our livestock, we're going to leave our children here. We're not going to return to our houses. We will not return to our houses until Bnei Israel is all settled in the land of Israel. I always thought this was a pasuk of such chutzpah. Right? I always thought this sounds like chutzpah, because they're making a statement. Because we're not going to inherit with them. On the other side of the Jordan. Because our inheritance has already come to us. They're making a very strong, very bold assertion. It almost sounds like they're stating fact, not making a request, right? Because we're not going to inherit with them. We're here. Our inheritance came to us. Now, does this sound like a good deal? If you're Moshe Rabbeinu, what do you say about this deal? Does it solve the concern that he had? You say no? Why do you say no?
Because they're still not living in the land.
Because they're not living in the land of Israel. That's true. But does this mitigate the concerns of Moshe Rabbeinu?
They're still fighting with the people.
Because they're still going to go fight. They're still going to put their lives on the line. Do you know who's really going to suffer from this deal?
Reuven.
How about the wives? What, they're going to leave their wives alone with children for the next 14 years? It's a long time. That's a very long time. 7 years of kibush, 7 years of... I don't know if they went back. They go back at some point while they're dividing up the land. But it's at least 7 years of kibush. I guess they didn't know how protracted the campaign was going to be. The campaign was 7 years, and then there was 7 years of splitting up the land. They might have left towards the beginning of that. I don't know if they waited till everybody was literally settled in their portion or not. But the point is, it's going to be a long time to be away from home. Even in the best case scenario, they're leaving their wives with children all alone in the middle of nowhere, pretty much, while they go in to fight. But anyway, it's something to think about from a human perspective. But the story goes on. So they make this deal. The deal is, we set up our homes and our ranches here, and we will come in and fight with you. So your concern was that this is going to undermine the morale of the soldiers of Israel. We're not going to let that happen, because we're going to go in on the front lines, and we're going to fight, and we're not going to set foot back at home until everybody is settled securely over there. So we're going to put our responsibility, our national responsibility, ahead of our personal interests, right? We're not going to allow this to take away from the enthusiasm or from the sense of commitment or the sense of morale of Am Yisrael. Fine. So what does Moshe Rabbeinu do? He takes the deal. ויאמר עליהם משה אם תעשו את הדבר הזה אם תחלצו לפני השם למלחמה ועבר לכם כל חלוץ את הירדן לפני השם. So if you do everything you said and all of your soldiers go before Hashem over the Yarden עד הורישו את אויביו מפניו until the enemy is driven out before him ונכבשה הארץ לפני השם ואחר תשובו וייתם נקים מהשם ומישראל והייתה הארץ הזאת לכם לאחוזה לפני השם. Fine. It's fine with me. Notice what words does he repeat many times here. Lifnei Hashem, right? Isn't that what he says? Lifnei Hashem a lot. What did they say a lot? Did they ever say Lifnei Hashem? They said once when they mentioned Asher Hika Hashem Lifnei Adat Yisrael. They said we're going to go Lifnei Bnei Yisrael. What does Moshe Rabbeinu say many times? Lifnei Hashem. If you go Lifnei Hashem, before Hashem to the war. If you cross the Yarden, before Hashem. If the land is conquered, before Hashem. Then you will be acquitted of your responsibility, Me Hashem u'mi Yisrael. In the eyes of Hashem and the eyes of Israel. So Moshe Rabbeinu is emphasizing the Hashem here, right? He's emphasizing the idea of Hashem here. Keep that in mind. Now, what does he say next? In verse 24, Binu lachem arim letapachem ugderot letzonachem. Build for yourselves cities for your children, ugderot letzonachem, and areas for your livestock. Okay? Fenced areas for livestock. What do they call that in English? The fenced areas. What are they? Oh, pens, right. Pens, that's the word. Yeah. Okay, I was trying to find the English word. And then he says, and they'll stay here. Okay? And that's what's going to happen. And then you're going to follow us into the land. Okay? So, Rashi points something out here, which on the surface is doesn't sound like earth-shattering at first, but let's take a look at it and see how it connects to the other theme here. Okay, they say, when they describe what they were going to do, this is very famous, of course, it's very, very famous. When they describe what they were going to do, what did they say they were going to do? What were they going to do?
Leave their livestock here with their children.
They said we're going to build fences for our livestock and cities for our children. Isn't that right? Right. If you look on Pasuk Tet Zayin in Rashi, what is he saying? Chasim mayu al mamonam yoter mi bneihem. They cared more about money than their own children. And I mean, you can see it from what I said to you before also, right? They're going to leave their children for they don't know how long they're going to be gone. We talk about absentee fathers today. This leaves this is even more. Ubnotem sheikdimu miknehem letapam, because they put the mikneh. They mentioned we're going to build. If you're thinking about your family, what do you say? What do you build first? Stables for your animals or house for your children? We would hope it's going to be house for your children, right? Amar lahem Moshe lochen. When Moshe Rabbeinu responds to them, did you see what he said? He says, "Asu ha'ikar ikar v'tafel tafel." You have to make what's essential essential and what's secondary secondary. Binu lachem tachila arim letapachem v'achar ken gidro letzonachem. First you make cities for your children, then you worry about your livestock. Okay? So wait a second. Do you really think in their hearts, deep down inside, they loved their sheep more than their animals? I mean, more than their children? Do you really think so? They love the sheep more than their own children? If you ask them, what do you like better? Mary's little lamb or whatever. It didn't have a name, so what did you like better? The little lamb over there or your child? They're going to say they care about their little lamb more? Unlikely. In their heart, if you ask somebody, nobody's going to admit, I care more about my money than my children. So when they said, we're going to build cities we're going to build fences for our livestock and cities for our children, do you think that they meant to really put it in priority, like in their mind? That was the priority at that time? Oh yeah, we care much more about our livestock than our children? Nobody's going to come out and say that, right? Moshe Rabbeinu is picking on the order of their language and saying, wait a second, you need to put things in the right order. You're talking about sheep before you talk about children. I'm going to talk about children before I talk about sheep. But he's nitpicking on them, right? He's nitpicking on them. I mean, let's say your car is at the mechanic and you have to pick up your car, and you have to pick up your children. And you say, oh, I need to pick up my car, and I have to pick up my children. Oh, you obviously care about your car more than your children. Not necessarily. I'm just telling you though.
That's order of events. I have to go pick up my car.
How do you know? Maybe it's not.
What's it?
No, but they said first.
What?
Because they said it first. Doesn't
Right, so that's what I'm saying. Just because they said it first, it doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It has to be earth-shattering. Yes?
The people didn't write the Torah. God wrote the Torah.
Right.
So he wrote it this way on purpose. It doesn't mean that it's there for written there for that reason.
So that's right. So in other words, if it were just a sigh, if it were just something that came off the top of their head and wasn't significant, then it wouldn't be in the Torah. The fact that Hashem, when He wrote the Torah, put their order of words one way and Moshe Rabbeinu's order of words the opposite way, is obviously trying to show you something about their real priorities. Now, nobody is going to confess or profess that they care more about material things than children. But Moshe Rabbeinu is, in a subtle way, conveying to them that that's what they're doing. Okay, in their language. Now, I want to show you something that I am guessing many of you are not familiar with, and that's why I like to always take us from the Parashat to the Tanakh. As many times people are unfamiliar with the Tanakh, as I talked about a couple times, and particularly lately we've been going into the book of Yoshua a lot. And I think if you see this story from the book of Yoshua, you're going to say, wow, what the Chachamim said in the Midrash, what Rashi quotes here about putting children after animals, putting children after livestock, is not just an observation. It's not just a trivial observation. It's very profound. I'm going to show you why. Because there is a story towards the end of Sefer Yoshua that proves Moshe Rabbeinu was correct. And when you see this story, you're really going to appreciate the observation of Rashi here. So what happens is, this is in Sefer Yoshua in Perek Kaf Bet. This is chapter 22 in Sefer Yoshua. And what happens is that the half of the tribe of Menashe and Shevet Reuven and Shevet Gad and half of Menashe, they all go to live on the other side of the Jordan because everybody is settled. And so Yoshua tells them, Shilacham Yoshua li'ahu lehem vayivarchem. He gives them a bracha. He says, go home. Vayomar lehem lemor. B'nechasim rabim shuvu el ahu lechem. V'mekne rav meod. Go back to your lots of money that you have. Right? That's what Yoshua says to them. בכסף ובזהב ובנחושת ובברזל ובסלמות הרבה מאוד חילקו שלום אויביכם ממאחיכם. So they divided up all of the spoils of war, and then they headed back home. Al pi Hashem biyad Moshe, exactly the way that Hashem told them in the hands of Moshe that they were going to be able to go. Right? So they go back home. They came to the area of the Yarden, and then they did something really unusual. Does anybody know what the Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe did on their side of the Yarden? Did anybody learn Sefer Yoshua? Does anybody know what they did? What did they do?
Start serving idols?
That was much later. Now they didn't do that yet. Later on, everybody started serving idols. They did something really unusual. They built a huge mizbeach, a huge altar. Okay, it says that they made Mizbeach ala Yarden, Mizbeach gadol lemar'eh, so big that you could see it across the way. It was a huge Mizbeach. Why would they do that? So vayishme'u v'nei Yisrael lemor, hine vanu v'nei Reuven v'nei Gad v'chatzi shevet ha-Menashe ha-Mizbeach el mul eretz Canaan. Look at what happened over here. Our brethren went to the other side of the Jordan River, and they built a huge Mizbeach facing our land. They said, we're going to go and have a civil war against them. Why did they want to have a civil war against them? What did they do wrong? They built the Mizbeach. What's wrong with that? How are they perceiving this?
As if they're separated from the Mizbeach, not enough.
Right, they're separating from the Jewish people. They're saying we have our own religion now. We're an independent entity. You guys have your Mishkan over there. We're going to build our own now because we're our own people. Now we're not part of Bnei Israel. That's what it looks like. They're making their own. That's why, like for example, why in Reform do they call the synagogue temple all the time? You know why? Because they said we don't need the Beit HaMikdash. We have our own temple. So they call it temple Beth Shalom and temple this and temple that. Because they want to say we don't need the Beit HaMikdash. We have a temple. So what did they do? They said, we don't need Shiloh. We have our own Mizbeach. We're not part of the Bnei Israel. We have our own independent religion now. They said, we better go after these guys. So first, they sent Pinchas himself, Pinchas ben Elazar HaKohen, and they sent one Nasi from every Shevet, And they came to Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. Ko amru kol adat Hashem, ma'amal hazeh asher me'altem be'elokei Yisrael. And they said to them, what is this treachery that you are committing against the God of Israel? How could you do this? Lashuv hayom me'acharei Hashem, v'vnotechem lachem mizbeach, limrodchem hayom b'Hashem. You guys are rebelling against Hashem. You're serving a different God. You're not part of the Jewish people anymore. You're separating from us religiously. Haven't we had enough problems with idolatry already that now you're starting like this? When you guys sin against Hashem, you know who ends up getting punished? Everybody. So they did the right thing because they realized there's something really bad going on here. They're already breaking the covenant with Hashem, and we just got to Eretz Yisrael. As soon as they were out of sight, it's like when somebody goes on vacation, they think they can do things, nobody else will know what they do. So they get what happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas, right? That doesn't happen with you guys because you're all together. You can't get away with anything. But if you go now, maybe you're gonna. But that's what they say, right? When people sneak away to somewhere when people sneak away to somewhere that nobody could see them, they figure we're out of range of the Nisi'im and all of the leaders. They can't see us. They don't know. So now we're going to start idolatry. That's what they thought they were doing. So they want to come after them. So what happens? So they have to explain themselves. Okay, and then they give another example. Oh, look at Achan ben Zerach. That's from the beginning of Sefer Yoshua. Because of one sin of one person, everybody was punished. So what's the idea? They are standing up. They're doing the right thing. They're rebuking somebody. They're correcting them. They're intervening. They didn't go right to violence. They didn't go right to attack them. They first confronted them and said, how can you be doing this? We understand what you're doing as breaking into another religion. And this is going to affect the entire Jewish people. And so now it turns out that Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad and Chatzi Shevet Menashe have to answer. And they say, an interesting pasuk where they say, El Elohim Hashem, El Elohim Hashem. God, Elohim, Hashem, Hu Yodea. V'Yisrael, Hu Yeda. Hashem already knows, and the Jewish people will know. Im b'mered v'im b'mal b'Hashem, al tashi'enu hayom hazeh. If we were really rebelling against Hashem in doing this, don't save us today, meaning you could kill all of us. But that's not what we were doing. Livnot lanu mizbeach lashuv me'acharei Hashem. Would we build an altar to turn away from God? We know that if we would make any kind of altar to try to compete with the altar of Hashem, we're going to have to be accountable to Him. We're not going to do that. Now listen to this, and you tell me how this connects to our parasha. Okay? They said if it were not for this worry, this is the reason we did it was because of worry. What's our worry? Machar yomeru v'nechem levanenu lemor ma lachem v'lashem Elokei Yisrael. Because one day your children are going to say to our children, what do you have to do with the God of Israel? You guys are not Jewish. You don't live in Eretz Yisrael. You live outside. Ugvul natan Hashem beinenu v'nechem bnei Reuven u'bnei Gad et hayarden en lachem chelek b'Hashem. Look, Hashem put a river between us. You have no portion in Hashem. You're not part of this people. You're not part of this nation. V'ishbitu b'nechem et banenu levilti yirot Hashem. And then your children will exclude our children, and our children are not going to grow up fearing Hashem because they're going to think we're not Jewish. So what happens? Vanomer, so we said to ourselves, Na'aseh na lanu livnot et hamizbeach. Let's make a mizbeach. Lo le'olah v'lo lazavach. We're not going to offer any sacrifices. It's a symbolic altar that we're going to put here. Ki edu benenu v'nechem. It's a sign between us and you. Uven dorotenu acharenu, and between the generations after us, our children and your children, our grandchildren and your grandchildren, la'avod et avodat Hashem lefanav, be'olotenu v'zavachenu b'shlamenu, that we should serve the service of Hashem before Him with all of the offerings. Ve'lo yomeru benechem machar levanenu en lachem chelek b'Hashem. So your children will not say to our children that you don't have any part in the Jewish people. Vanomer, and we said, Vayaki yomeru elenu ve'odorotenu machar ve'amarnu ru'et tavnit mizbach Hashem asher asu avotenu. Lo la'olav velo lezevach ki edu b'nenu v'nechem. So what are we going to say to our children? What's the proof that we're really Jewish? Because we have an altar exactly like the altar that's in Israel, but we don't use it. So they'll say to us, well, why don't you use you built this beautiful mizbech, why don't you use it? What's the reason why? Oh, because it's just to show you that we really identify with the Jewish people over on the other side of the Yarden. If they used it, of course, it would dilute their connection to the central center, the mainland of Israel. But if they have a mizbech and they specifically don't use it, then they're demonstrating, yes, we have the mizbech, but we don't use it. Why don't you use it? Why'd you build a mizbech that you don't use? Because you're identifying yourself with another mizbech, the one in Eretz Israel. So our children will see. Why do we have this here? To show you that our loyalties are really with the mainland Israel. That's the idea. God forbid that we would ever rebel against Hashem to make a competing mizbech. And so, of course, when they heard this, what did they say? Okay, it's a good thing we didn't kill you guys. That's what they said. It's a good thing we asked first, before we just went right into fighting mode. So Bnei Yisrael said, they blessed Hashem and said, thank God we don't have to go to war over this, and we see that this is going to be a symbol between us forever. Now, I just told you a nice long story. Did anybody know this story before? Someone heard this story before? Important story. Okay. So what does this have to do with our parasha? Who can tell me? Why did I bring this today? Just to fill the time? What does this have to do with the parasha? Any ideas?
They obviously care about their children.
They care about their children.
Maybe they even took Moshe's message as a rebuke, and they said, we have to, care about our children more. Make sure that the tradition stays within us.
Well, in a way, this whole situation kind of vindicates Moshe Rabbeinu, though, right? Because they thought first about their financial situation, and they said, "Oh my gosh, the chinuch of our children. How are we going to raise our children over here? They're going to think they're not Jewish. Oh, what? We better build a mizbeach." But they thought of it afterwards. In other words, it's really true what Moshe Rabbeinu said. In other words, if they had been thinking about that from the beginning, we don't want to be in a geographically distinct location, because when we're in a geographically distinct location, our children are going to grow up with the wrong values. They're going to think they're not Jewish. And what are we going to do then? They didn't think about that at the time. All they thought about was, how are we going to make more money, and what's going to be the most comfortable place for us to be able to raise our livestock. And then once they settled in, they start building a mizbeach. Why? Because all of a sudden they had a chinuch crisis, right? Oh my gosh, how are we going to raise our children in the Yarden? It's like a person that goes to the middle of nowhere. There's certain places in the middle of nowhere where you can be very successful in business because things are very cheap, and you can come and invest and do very well. The only thing is there are no Jews there. Right? So oftentimes, that makes it difficult for Jews to move, let's say, to Jews who want to stay very closely identified with the Jewish people and want to raise their children in a Jewish way and want to have a Torah environment and want to teach Torah to their children. They need to be in a certain type of neighborhood, a certain type of community. And so if they make a sacrifice on the type of community, a lot of times they see it reflected in their children not having as strong of a connection to the Jewish people, or not having as strong of a connection to Torah. And what are their priorities is the question. Does a person first put as their priority, what is the ideal communal circumstance for my family to stay true to Hashem and stay true to Torah, stay true to mitzvot, and then I'll figure out how I'm going to do parnasah after that? Or does the person say, first I want to figure out what the best place to make money, and then, oh shoot, I just realized I moved to Hong Kong. Actually, there are a lot of Jews in Hong Kong now. But that's why, right? That's why. Because they moved there, or how did the Jews come to Mexico, or they came to Hong Kong, or Jews came to to the Caribbean islands, or they came to all kinds of far-flung places, initially because of trade, initially because of business. And then after they were already settled in there, they said, wait a second, what are we going to do now for our children? How are we going to be able to preserve their heritage? How are we going to be able to figure out how to stay connected to Am Yisrael and to Torah? So what happens is that, yes, what Moshe Rabbeinu points out in the Torah, what Rashi says, they cared more about their money than their children, it actually comes out later. yes, they took steps to remedy it, right? They took steps to correct it. But the fact that they had to correct it shows you that it was something that they thought about and only started to address after the fact. It wasn't the first thing in their mind. Because if it had been the first thing in their mind, maybe they would have changed, they wouldn't have been so quick to settle on the other side of the Yarden. And if you look at future Jewish history, meaning after they settle, the first tribes to be exiled, of course, are Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad. The first ones to slide into idolatry are Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad because they're the most disconnected from central Israel. They're the most disconnected. They have the most diluted Jewish identity. And so they're the easiest to assimilate into some other culture and to take in influences from other places because they are geographically, they didn't have television, they didn't have internet, I don't have to tell you this, but they didn't have any way to stay engaged with what was going on in Eretz Yisrael if they lived on the other side of the Yarden. There was simply no way to stay connected. So it was easy for them to grow apart and develop their own identity. And there's a lesson here about priorities. When we make choices, when we make decisions, to evaluate what is our first priority in a situation, and then question the second priority. Not to put the second thing first. So what Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad did wasn't just that they turned the words around, but by looking at that, what the Torah is hinting to you is this is not the best thing for their children. This is not the best chinuch decision for their children to make this move, or to remain there, to not make the move. Moshe Rabbeinu pointed it out to them in a subtle way, and in the book of Yoshua you see them scrambling to try to fix it, to try to repair it. Now, maybe it wasn't too late at that point, but eventually they definitely drifted away from the Jewish people. So you see how important it is sometimes to know the follow-up to these stories in the Nach. You have to know the postscript or the conclusion of these stories, especially in Sefer Yoshua, where a lot of what's going on in Bamidbar comes to its end, and you see what the real impact, what the real implications were of the decisions of Bnei Reuven and Bnei Gad. So it wasn't just a matter of words; it was something even more significant than that. Since we have 5 more minutes, so I would like to talk about one more thing. Okay. Yeah. Oh, sure. Maybe
Why didn't Moshe ask Hashem what Hashem's opinion is here? Why didn't he just give his own opinion as to, okay, you know what? Separate. That's a good idea.
That is a very good question. It's interesting that, like we said before, when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to them, in terms of when they speak a lot about the political ramifications of what they're doing. They talk about Lifnei B'nai Israel. We're going to go Lifnei B'nai Israel, and we're going to take care of our children, we're going to take care of our animals. When Moshe Rabbeinu speaks, he mentions Hashem's name a lot. Now, how did he have permission to do this without specifically checking with Hashem? That is not clear. That isn't clear. But in the book of Yoshua, it says this was the land that was given to them by Hashem, Biyad Moshe. So apparently, Moshe did have confirmation from Hashem that this was a deal that he could accept. Okay? So it wasn't that he just did it as completely independently, because later on also in the Torah it also mentions that Hashem gave it to them. So yes, Moshe assigned it to them. He's the one that conveyed it, but he checked it. He checked it with a higher authority first. But the fact that he mentions Hashem so many times and they mention Bnei Israel so many times also speaks to their different priorities. That for Moshe Rabbeinu, this is all about Hashem. This is all about serving Hashem. This is all about bringing Kiddusha to the land of Israel. This is all about establishing an Am Kadosh in Holy Land. And for them, it's much more about where are my livestock going to fit? Where are they going to pasture? How exactly am I going to put my kids in what houses? And that. So it's a totally different kind of cheshbon. They're making a different type of calculation than what Moshe Rabbeinu is making. Moshe Rabbeinu is much more interested in the Hashem aspect. You're going in before Hashem. The land is going to be conquered before Hashem. The Kiddush Hashem, the sanctifying of Hashem's name here. And they kind of lost sight of that until they were already settled. And they said, oh, wait a second. What are we? Who are we really? How are we identifying with Bnei Israel? Since so much of, especially in the ancient times, in the ancient world, but even after that, so much of our identity is geographically determined. Like we identify, let's say, as Americans because we live in America. So much of who we are is established by, is influenced by, and the way we see ourselves by the environment in which we live and by our surroundings. So somebody who doesn't live, when the whole vision of the Jewish people is so connected to Eretz Israel, and the nation of Israel is entering Eretz Israel, and you decide to stay back, that's a statement, even if you go in with them, You're not settling with them. You're not going to be on a daily basis living with them. That's a statement that your identity is somewhat distinct from them. And then the question is, well, how far is that going to go? How distinct is it going to be? And there's certainly a difference between Jews, let's say, living outside of Israel and inside Israel even today. Because when you live in Israel, Jewish culture, granted, much of it secular, not all of it good, maybe some of it, distorted or diluted or whatever, but Jewish culture is around you all the time. The language is around you all the time. The influence of Tanakh literature and all of that is around you all the time. So your sense of identifying as a Jew is much more complete. Whereas when you live in America, you're a Jew in America. So 90% of the people you see are American, not Jewish. Let's say if you're walking around the street, you don't see Jews everywhere. Not everything on television is in any way connected to Judaism. Not everything around the block is related to Judaism. So you feel like you're maintaining this commitment to Torah, but the world around you has nothing to do with it. Your immediate environment doesn't have much to do with it. We are an oasis of Torah here in the middle of a whole bunch of other stuff. So the idea of separating off from that to make your own kind of encampment across the Yarden is a risky move. It's a risky move. And therefore they had to try to find ways to ameliorate, to lessen the effects of that on the next generation. But it shows you the importance of where we choose to live, with whom we choose to associate, and what values and priorities we put first when it comes to making major decisions in our lives. And we see that sometimes we don't really fully take in the consequences or the impact of what these choices can be until it's too late. And we're trying to scramble to fix it. So let's not do that. That's the lesson of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, that we should analyze our priorities ahead of time and not wait to discover that we've made an error when we're already settled and it's difficult to change course. And so I think that my idea of slipping in another topic is probably too late now. But Be'ezrat Hashem, next year we will take up the other topic.